Hi, everyone. Welcome to our last Fall Puppet Forum of our semester here at the Ballard Institute. My name is Emily Wicks, and I'm serving as co-interim director for this semester. Our director, John Bell, will be back in January, so you can look forward to seeing him in the new year with all of our new forums. So before we get started with this really exciting puppet forum, topics in Japanese puppetry, I just have a couple announcements for you all. So just a reminder that the Ballard Institute continues to make these types of program free and accessible. And so if you'd like to support this type of programming, I will drop a link in the chat for you to make a donation. Also, the last day to see Swing into Action, Maurice Sendak in the World of Puppetry is December 16th. So that is coming up next week. So please stop by the museum before then to see this really fantastic exhibition. We will reopen the museum on January 26th with a new exhibition of work by the puppeteer Ralph Lee. So you can join our email list, and I'll drop a link in the chat soon for you to do that so you can learn more about our upcoming exhibition and events. This forum is co-sponsored generously by the UConn Asian American Cultural Center and the Asian and Asian American Studies Institute. So thank you to both of those organizations for supporting this forum. Now, the presentations were pre-recorded as a lot of the speakers are in Japan, where there is a time difference. So we pre-recorded presentations, but all of our speakers are going to join us after the presentations for a live Q&A. So as we're watching the presentations, feel free to drop your questions in the chat to make comments, and the speakers can get back to you on that. So without further ado, we will start the Topics in Japanese Puppetry Forum. So let me go ahead and get that started. And like I said, continue to comment and ask questions as we're playing it.
Hello and welcome to this session of the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry's Fall Forum, Topics in Japanese Puppetry. I'm Claudia Orenstein, and I was very honored to be asked to organize one of these events for the Ballard. John Bell, who usually does them, is on leave this semester, and so I'm going to try and fill his very big shoes and do my best to do that. So today we're going to look at a few different presentations. We have guests, wonderful guests giving presentations on different areas of Japanese puppetry. I was very fortunate last year to get a Fulbright fellowship to spend 9 months in Japan doing research on puppetry and ritual. And while I was there, I was really looking at a lot of different kinds of puppetry outside of bunraku. But instead of sharing my own research today, I wanted to introduce you to, or acquaint you again with, people you may already know, and have them share their work. Two of our guests are people that I spent a lot of time with in Japan, and our third guest just returned from Japan doing his own research. So I'm going to quickly introduce them, and they're each going to give different presentations today on different areas that I hope will expand our understanding and our views on puppetry in Japan and how diverse the forms of puppetry are in Japan. So first, I'm just going to quickly introduce Yoko Yamaguchi, who's going to be our first speaker. Welcome. Yoko is in Japan today, and then I'll give a more full introduction to each of our guests as they give their presentations. Next, I want to introduce Mari Boyd, who is also coming to us from Tokyo. Hi, Mari, nice to see you. And then Zach Dorn, who's our third guest, who has just come off a plane from Japan and is out in California. So we coordinated all of these different time zones. So we're going to start today with our presentation from Yoko Yamaguchi. I'm going to just give a little introduction. Yoko is a research fellow of the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science and a lecturer at Waseda University. She also serves on the editorial board of the Japan Unima Yearbook and is an international programmer of puppet theater for PUC Tokyo, which is a wonderful puppet company in Tokyo. She earned her PhD in aesthetics from Tokyo University of the Arts in 2017 and received research fellowships from Klassik Stiftung in Weimar in 2019. So excuse me as I pronounce these words, not in one of my languages, and from Zentralinstitut für Kunstgeschichte, I get that right, in Munich in 2022. Her current research focuses on the evolution of the discourse on puppet theater, that's Ningyo Geki, Ningyo Shibai, in Japan since the 1900s, as well as the formation of modern Japanese puppetry beginning in the 1920s under the influence of European puppetry. And I got to spend a lot of time with Yoko when I was in Japan last year, which was just wonderful. And while I was there, she went off to Germany to do some research, and I was very interested in the work that she was doing. So I'm really glad to get to hear in more detail what it's all about today. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Yoko.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about today my research topic as the prehistory of Japanese modern, of the birth of the Japanese modern puppet theater. So since I have only 15 to 20 minutes, so I'm going to start this presentation right away. Moment. So I will share my screen. Do you see guys my PowerPoint slideshow?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So I'm going to start. So my title is 3 Phases Before the Birth of Japanese Modern Puppet Theater. So from around 1890 to 1910, as you know, as some of you guys may know, there was a Japanese theatrical reform, or in other words, so there was a traditional kabuki theater, and in addition to it, the new theater was born. And little later, a similar reformation took place in puppet theater. A group of young artists, namely Sendai Korea and Ito Kisaku, who would later be prominent in the field of drama theater, gave the marionette performance Aglaven et Célisette in 1923. And this was the first puppet performance in Japan to have marionettes made in a Western design and a Western storyline. And this is recognized as the beginning of modern Japanese puppet theater. And in the history of Japanese puppet theater, there is general agreement with that modern puppet theater began with this show. But there has been little discussion of what happened before that. Therefore, I would like to talk about the background of it. And I ask myself following questions. Why did new puppet theater emerge at this time? And what exactly influenced the creation of Western style puppet theater in Japan? To answer these questions, I examined Japanese magazine articles and other publications dealing with Western puppetry from the 1900s to the 1910s. And as a result, I found that during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the concept or image of puppetry in Japan went through 3 different phases. So there was first phase, where Japanese theater, such as bunraku, was criticized as outdated, while a discourse emerged that defended its unique but primitive taste, referring to European folk theater. And there was a second phase when European, especially German, artistic puppet theater of the beginning of the 20th century was introduced to Japan, and puppetry piqued the interest of theater people and visual artists. And finally, there was a phase where a re-evaluation of traditional Japanese puppetry began in comparison to European puppet theater. I will discuss these 3 phases, but since I have only 15 minutes, I'll be as brief as possible. So let's begin with the first phase. It wasn't until the 20th century that Western puppetry became known in Japan. Prior to that time, we do not find any discourse to see Japanese puppet theater and Western puppet theater as belonging to a single puppet theater genre. Even when the Dark Troupe, one of the Victorian marionetteists, arrived in Japan in 1894, they were only seen as a spectacle or misemono displayed in an amusement park. And newspaper reviews did not compare them to Japanese puppet theater. And the Dark Troupe, a dark show, is described in a review as a big shot among foreign spectacles, gaijin kogyo mono chu no kyohaku, and compared to the horse circus that came to Japan from Italy in the 1870s and 1880s. So when did it change? When did Western puppet theater come to be seen as puppet theater, the same as bunraku and other puppet theaters in Japan? The earliest magazine article I have found that discusses Western puppet theater in comparison with Japanese puppet theater is the one in the theatrical magazine Kabuki, January 1905. The magazine Kabuki is one of the most popular theater publications of the time. And this short article of 1905 provides a general overview of the presence of folk puppet theater in Italy, Germany, England, France, Spain, and other nations. And then from 1907 to 1909, there appeared a series of 8 articles in Kabuki written by literary scholar Yoshida Hakko. And this has in total 45 pages and describes the folk puppetry, again, of Germany, Spain, Italy, and France. And these articles were written to defend puppet theater, Japanese puppet theater, which was losing its popularity in Japan at that time. The anonymous author of the first article writes, puppet theater has its unique tastes, which should never be discarded, and I encourage the preservation of puppet theater. And the other article, the latter author, Yoshida, writes, it is a shame that puppet theater, which has a long history, both in the East and West, is gradually declining and approaching extinction. At least in Japan, puppet theater was in a situation as they described, especially bunraku, the biggest puppet theater at the time, was going through a survival crisis. In 1903, the annual attendance of the bunraku theater was about 145,000. And in 1904 and 1905, there was a Russo-Japan War, so it had a little bit less attendance. And in 1906, there was a 100 per day annual reduction. So in 1906, the annual attendance was 120,000, but just 2 years later, in 1908, it was 80,000. And in 1913, it became 47,000. As a bunraku, or puppet theater in general, was not only losing its audience, it was also considered outdated by critics. For example, a review in October 1909 issue of Enge Gaho, which is another very popular theater magazine, says, in this ever-evolving world, puppet theater is really old-fashioned, and that it was unnatural to have persons 3 to 5 times larger than the puppet constantly following behind the puppet. And he continues, puppet theater is not a technique that should be practiced in the world after today. When we see a puppet show, we cannot help feeling a kind of discomfort. And we should regard it rather strange that we can see puppet shows even today in the year 1909 in the central entertainment district of the imperial capital. If these opinions had been shared by Japanese theater lovers, puppet theater would have died out in Japan. But in the midst of puppet theater's rock bottom slump, there was those who continued to love it, like the writers of the above mentioned articles of Kabuki. I will now discuss the second phase. This is the phase in which is a little bit later than the first phase. Here, not folk, but artistic puppetry of Germany was introduced to Japan, and it attracted the attention of theater professionals. From the late 1900s to the 1910s, which overlapped the period of Bunraku's decline, a puppet theater in Munich, Germany, became known in the Japanese theatrical and literary world. The theater, Marionettentheater Münchner Künstler, is considered a pioneer of German artistic puppet theater. In the theater, used scripts by contemporary writers such as Schnitzler and Maeterlinck, and the puppets for those performances were created by Munich's best artists, including painters, sculptors, and illustrators. And in 1910, in Japan, Kaoru Osanai, a playwright and a director who was very influential in the theater world at the time, published a photograph of puppets of Marionettentheater Münchner Künstler in a literary magazine, along with the caption, "A puppet play, Der tapfere Kassian." And the influence of this picture soon appeared in Japanese drama theater. In May 1912, a prominent drama theater company staged the same play, Kassian, and the costumes were modeled after the photo. And the image of the Western puppetry was greatly renewed when the new trend of artistic puppetry in Germany became known in Japan. German puppetry is not seen as a folk culture anymore, but a kind of theater that Japanese drama theater should imitate. And after this, information of Western puppet theater began to come in Japan in large numbers. Between 1900 and 1999, I could find only a couple of articles on dealing with Western puppet theater, but between 1910 and 1919, there are around 30 that I have found. So finally, let's talk about the third phase. This is a phase in which the reevaluation of traditional Japanese puppetry began in comparison with European puppetry. From 1917 onwards, Shoyo Tsubouchi, he's the first translator of Shakespeare and the leading playwright of the time of theater reform, began to discuss the differences between Western puppet theater and Japanese one. He mentions Goethe, Georges Sand, and Maurice Maeterlinck, and says that all European plays, even the ones praised by these great writers, are done in marionette style, and that in terms of manipulation, they are simple and childish compared to Bunraku. And he emphasizes the superiority of Japanese puppet theater. He also says that in the West, puppeteers are hidden, which may be more realistic, but this does not mean that Japanese puppetry is inferior. He says that Japanese puppet theater is like a sea urchin or dried eggs of crawfish, the delicacies that Westerners cannot appreciate. As we saw earlier, at one time, Japanese audience did dislike the visible puppeteers and thought to be unnatural. But with the knowledge of Western puppet theater, it can now be enjoyed as a kind of original and high-class taste. So he even writes, it's a major flaw in our study of theater history that these unique works of art, which means Japanese puppet theater, have been treated as if they were just another ordinary thing and have never been studied or examined. At the time, the Japanese theater world was looking up to and imitating the West. But at least in puppet theater, the awareness that Japan was not inferior to the West, but possibly superior, might have inspired Japanese theater people. And the result was the birth of Japanese modern puppet theater in 1923. In creating the stage of Aglaven et Célisette, first non-traditional puppet show in Japan, the performers referred to both Japanese and Western puppet theater. They said they have researched Bunraku, Yukiza's Marionette, Marionettentheater Münchner Künstler, Richard Tischner, Craig's theory of Übermarionette, Goethe's Wilhelm Meister, and Heinrich von Kleist's essay. So through the discourses on Western puppetry in Japan since 1900s, as we have seen, a new type of artist has grown up who absorbs both traditional Japanese and Western puppet theater as a single theatrical genre called puppet theater. And this marked the beginning of Japanese modern puppet theater. That's it for my presentation. Thank you for your listening. Wait, so how can I finish my...
You stop sharing? Yeah, great. Wow, Yoko, that's fascinating. So much fascinating material. I mean, there's so much, I'm coming from a really theater background, and there's so much discussion about the influence of theater from the West on Japan at this period. But this is the first I've really heard about this relationship with puppetry. There's really been no discussion of it. Yeah.
Thank you for your comment.
And what I also find is that I actually hadn't known specifically. You talked a lot when we were there about what you were working on. I didn't realize how focused it was on marionettes in particular. But it's a wonderful segue, I think, into Mari's presentation. So
Yes.
maybe we'll go straight into Mari's presentation, and then we'll have questions afterwards. Thank you. That was I feel like that was such a rich presentation. So Mari, let me introduce Mari to everybody. Mari Boyd, who I was also lucky to spend a lot of time with in Japan this year. She is a professor emeritus at Sophia University, which was my host institution in Tokyo, and a researcher and translator of modern Japanese theater, including material performance. Mari Boyd is the author of The Aesthetics of Quietude, Ota Shogo and the Theater of Divestiture from Sophia University Press from 2006, and also more recently from Sophia University Press, this book, Japanese Contemporary Objects, Manipulators and Actors in Performance. It's a great book. I think it's only available through Sophia University connections. Is that true?
No, Amazon JP.
On Amazon. Oh, Amazon JP. If you look at the Japanese Amazon, you can get a copy of this wonderful book. That was from 2020. And she's contributed numerous articles to Japanese and English language theater periodicals and books, such as Modern Meta Patterns in a History of Japanese Theater from Cambridge University Press. As translator, she's contributed to the 10-volume collection of Half a Century of Japanese Theater, this series, and she is on the editorial committee for the Engeki Japanese Theater in the New Millennium Anthology series, where they're always coming out with translations of contemporary Japanese plays, a really fabulous project. And she's also an editor of eJournal, which is the e-journal for the Japan Society of Theater Research. The reason it's such a wonderful segue, last year when we were together, she introduced me to Yukiza, a string puppet company in Tokyo that has a very long history. And they were very gracious and generous in letting me sit in on rehearsals for their new production. And I think it's right in the tradition of what Yoko was talking about, but I'll let you connect all the dots for us and look at the contemporary situation.
So I gamen kyoyu, is that what I do? Slideshow. I'm not getting the slideshow up. You know what the problem is?
Not
Slideshow. Oh, okay. There it is. All right. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Right. Hi, I'm Mari Boyd. I'm talking on the investitures in the Yuki marionette family today. Right. The Edo marionette Yukiza, founded in 1635, is the oldest active marionette company in Japan, and the marionette troupe Ishiza a branch family troupe of the Yukisa. Okay. Together they are in transition with the recent 2021 investiture of Kazuma as Mago Saboro the 13th and his cousin Keita as Ishi the 4th this past May. Both are already launched on leading their respective companies for the next generation of work. Today, I will be talking mainly about the parent company and Mago Saboro the 13th. Here he is. Name succession ceremonies are common in family-based traditional Japanese performing arts, such as no and kabuki. The hereditary transference of the leader's title includes ceremonial recognition of other changes in rank in the company. And this is the Ishiza, the father and son, here in their poster. Right. The Mago Saboro name is known as an onnagata role. An onnagata performer, in this case, is a male puppeteer who specializes in manipulating female puppets. To avoid confusion between Mago Saboro the 13th and his father, the latter decided to use his magic lantern title, Senyu the 3rd, from now on. Okay. The hereditary transmission of authority and skills in the traditional arts is not always smooth in contemporary times, as the subsequent generation can be reluctant to rise to the occasion due to disinterest in the art or other factors. Kazuma went through a period of estrangement between ages 15 and 22, part of which he spent attending university to study commerce. In 2003, he returned home to perform again, but continued to have strained relations with his family. He accepted the title, but how he would perform and lead as the 13th was a real concern for the company. Okay, do I go next? The 13th's vision for his company was to ensure that the traditional repertory was maintained and transmitted, so that the traditional and new would be equally represented. He would continue to use the 70 to 80 centimeter tall marionettes with 17 strings and apply traditional manipulation. He also hopes to revive the tall bridge style of manipulation that requires the strings to be anywhere from 2 to 3 meters long. And she's really getting into it there. Okay. As for the program, the naming ceremony celebration program, there were 2 items, the grocer's daughter, Oshi, and the fire watchtower. It's a short dancing. It's a solo onnagata role, okay, by Mago Saboro the 13th. Quick synopsis: a young woman played by the 13th climbs up the watchtower and strikes the alarm drum to catch her lover's attention. It is a choice opportunity to display onnagata expertise, such as the ability to express passion, courage, loyalty, clumsiness on the ladder, okay, maybe desperation. There he is with his parents manipulating the chanter and the shamisen player, comic characters. Okay. The second item on the program was 11th Night, or On a Starry Night, by Wee Shin Chong. It's an adaptation of Shakespeare's 12th Night, and Chong is a resident Korean playwright director. Okay, I assume you know the story, but to jog your memory, here is the basic love triangle. This is Osino is in love with Olivia, who looks a bit like olive oil, but nonetheless, she's not really an onnagata. Okay, she's in love with Cesario, and Cesario, who is Viola, is in love with Osino. Okay, as you can tell, transformation is a key theme, both in the naming ceremony and within the play in various ways. There is a single actor in the show. This man is an actor. He's the fool and the old manservant in the scene. And the others are puppeteers, and this is also a puppeteer here. Right. So the old manservant is saving Viola through artificial resuscitation. Because remember, they have a shipwreck. Sebastian is lost, it seems, and Viola is dying. But she is saved by the servant, and there she is. This is the only time that you will see her in a dress, right? And looking feminine. She decides to leave the ship looking for Sebastian, her twin brother, and so to protect herself, she takes on a male disguise. So the first transformation, Viola in Cesario's clothes. Okay. And the old manservant gives Viola some advice on how to appear masculine. Now, what could that advice be? Now, I'm going to take a long way around to explain this. Okay. Let's look at the kind of clothing, okay, of the Edo period and how the puppets were built. Old Edo, 1603 to 1867, had a kimono hakama culture. The hakama we've been looking at quite a bit already because it's ceremonial, right? It's a formal attire, even today. And these are the casual wear that young men today wear, the kimono, yukata, right? The prototype is basically the same as the Edo kimono for men. And so, where am I? Okay. So Edo puppets, the inherited puppet structure. Edo puppets were built to wear such clothes, okay? But inside they look like this. And this is how they replicated the lifestyle, including the traditional male gait. This is some basic information on the inherited puppets and whether the puppet makes the kimono or the kimono makes the puppet, right? We'll take a look at that. So I need to explain two traditional male gaits that are no longer common today. In fact, like the number has become very unusual. Right? So ganimata, okay, the first one. In traditional string puppetry, the male stride is conventionally bow-legged or bandy-legged. Feet and knees pointing to 10 minutes to 2 o'clock, right? When the legs separate, okay, the kimono also opens out a bit and reveals the sandals and sometimes the lower part of the male undergarment. Okay, this was what commoners wore and townsmen and farmers, not so much the aristocrats. Okay, so this ganimata style can include a standing posture with legs spread out. Okay, here is the puppeteer standing in ganimata to do his puppeteering. Osino is a bit ganimata, though his knees are straight. And here we have a splay chorus line. Osino, splayed legs, Cesario, splayed legs, Sebastian and Olivia, all splayed legs, even the woman. Okay. So Chong introduced, oh, sorry, wait a minute, where am I? Oh, yes. So the old manservant's instruction to Viola, now that she was a man, was to walk ganimata style. Right. Okay. So the playwright and director Chong has introduced ganimata early in the play so that the audience, the modern audience, realizes that the male characters are supposed to display this unattractive yet comical ambulatory style. It's not faulty manipulation, but entirely intentional. So Chong is telling us, get used to it, please. Okay. The next, the second walk is number. This usually refers to a wide stride where the arm and leg on the same side, okay, swing simultaneously. So it's difficult to do, but it is possible. So it's not the right arm going with the left leg. Okay. It's kind of semi-monolithic. It is said to be a faster and less tiring way of walking and running for pre-modern messengers, or an impressive way of presenting yourself. Okay, it used to be called the samurai walk. According to Senyu, in Edo puppetry, number is used to indicate an active attitude along with positive release of energy. Furthermore, with small puppets, the hand and shoulder tend to be pulled along by leg movement anyway. Okay, you can prevent that swing from happening by turning or twisting the control board. And there are various hypotheses about this, but they all disagree with each other, and it's rather difficult to sort out. So I'll leave that for some other time. Let's watch a video clip of Duke Osino exhibiting a variety of footwork and motions, including some comic symptoms of lovesickness. Madly in love with Olivia, the Duke persuades Cesario to court her in his stead, and he gets a bit carried away in the meantime. If you like, you could count the number you notice. They're like 2 steps, 3 steps, right? Or the other ways of moving or sitting down. So here goes. I will give some English translation, not all, for this. I am at your service, my lord. Oh no. I'm a goner. That lovesickness is making me crazy, Cesario. You know everything about me. I reveal to you my heart's secrets. Is that not so? Yes, sir. Now listen, go to Olivia's residence. Number. And stay there until you give your message. Even if your legs grow roots, you must not leave. Now go. Maybe she will not allow you an interview. Make a noise. Make a commotion. Nonsense. Number. What's your man? Go tell her of my love. This is an order. If I am granted an interview, what should I say? Confide my burning passion to her. What kind of kneeling is this? Bring down her defenses. She is bound to listen when she hears words of love from your sweet lips. Would it go that well? Of course it will. But if you, with your glowing red lips, your dark eyes, slim nape or neck, your delicate voice, just like a young girl. Even I want to. Hug you tight. He's limping, it seems now. He's kneeling, girly style. She will want to meet you, I'm sure of it. You are the right one for this task. If all goes well, my fortune will be yours. Like me, you will be able to live easily. Get to it. I will do my best to win her heart. Number. Okay, so you have just seen how traditional styles of walking are interwoven into familiar ways of walking and movement. So this is, their performances are not all traditional style or modern style. It's always some kind of a mix. And moving on to the next forum work, the 13th starred in starred in was Kafkas Metamorphosis, March 2022. Remember Gregor Samsa, right? Well, he does not change his name, but his appearance changes radically into a huge insect, negating his humanity. The artist's design for Gregor as an insect, this is the insect head and the boy's head, the man's head, right? The man's head actually has a long neck that you cannot see from this angle. Amazingly, the part of Gregor Samsa turned out to be the Mago Saboro's best role so far. The highlight of this play is in his manipulation of the insect. Three puppets were used to illustrate the process of Gregor's deterioration. The first was young, looked brawny like a wrestler, but was kind of clumsy. The second was dynamic and had a handle-like device, okay, that enabled him to climb walls and hang from the ceiling. And the third has a rotten apple in his back. Right? I think he's dead by now. Right? A gray hair and a bloodstained face. Gregor fighting his father with apples. Okay, the family confab with something or someone eavesdropping. Okay, and you probably want to see what he's like in action a little more. So Gregor versus the housekeeper. I'm going to move this along a bit so that it's not too long.
やるか私と一緒に交えようってのかいクソ虫の分際でおやるかほれシュッシュッシュッって言うなシュッシュッって言うな
Stop that. Oh, you're acting tough, are you? All right, how's this then? Take that. Stop saying that. Okay, I'm gonna get you. Go. Huh? Where'd he go? Gee. All right, I've had enough with you. Take this. Oh no, no. Some invisible force hit me. All right, I'm going to use my strongest weapon. Here it comes. Oh. All right. What, you've given up already? Come on. You're no good. Come at any time. I'll be ready for you. Oh, whoops. The play ended with Gregor's insect life being cut at its strings by Mago Saboro. In that moment of stillness and silence was revealed Mago Saboro's enormous capacity for projecting pathos and alienation. He has found his calling in that he has gained the means to universalize the sedimented traumatic stress of his childhood and communicate it on stage. Metamorphosis is about alienation and death, but for the 13th, also about rebirth. For he has shown his mettle and readiness to take on the central position of artistic leader of his company. Okay. How am I doing for time?
I think we may need to wrap things up here so we can
Okay. All right. So that brings me to the end of the Yuki's aside. And I think the issues, the cousin's life is very much like Mago Saboro the 13th. So I don't think I need to repeat that. but I can add more later, maybe at another time in the
Save
discussion.
it for another.
So yeah, I'll save it for later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. All right, so it's so fascinating that in having this position in taking over this company and having to kind of safeguard this tradition from 1635 that you have to also master a kind of contemporary as well as older models of performance. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen. Great. And I think, I want to make sure we move on to Zach. And I should have mentioned to people that this is recorded because we are coordinating all these different time zones. And we're going to come together. And when you're watching this, there's going to be a live streaming for questions and answers, and we'll have more discussion. And I think when we get back for discussion, I really want to think about the connections between what Yoko was telling us about of the kind of import of contemporary of Western models of puppetry and how that works into Yukiza company that's from 1635 and the connections there. But before we move on to that, let's welcome our third guest, Zach Dorn. Hi, Zach. Oh,
hi, Claudia. How are you?
Good to meet you. I'm going to just give a little introduction. And
Okay.
Zach is a filmmaker, performing artist, and writer. His multimedia puppet performances and stop motion films have premiered at Ars Nova in New York, and St. Anne's Warehouse in New York, at Red Cat in Los Angeles, and the Toronto International Film Festival. In 2016, he was selected as an inaugural Julie Taymor World Theater Fellow and spent a year studying the use of automata in festival performance. And he spent a lot of time in Japan. While in Tokyo, he apprenticed under psychoanalyst turned experimental theater director Kuro Tanino. In 2002, which is just the last 2 months, he has expanded his research into Japanese sliding panel theater, Fusuma Karakuri, on the island of Tokushima, as an Ishibashi Foundation, Japan Foundation Fellow for Research on Japanese Art. And he is fresh off the plane going to tell us about this. He received his MFA in experimental animation from Cal Arts in 2021 and is currently developing a new puppet performance in collaboration with the experimental musician Aaron Dahl and the Norwegian Arts Council. So you get around, Zach. But he's just been in Japan doing research on Fusuma Karakuri. And so we're going to get to hear a brand new investigation. Very interested to hear about what you've been up to in Japan and what you've been looking at there.
Oh, thanks, Claudia. It does feel brand new. I'll say that I just got back from Japan. I first saw a Fusuma Karakuri performance in 2016. And then I was really interested in this type of performance. And now I went back to study it more. And I feel like I have more questions. Like I wanted to go to Japan and research and learn more about this practice. And now I feel like I'm back from Japan. And I just have more questions and I'm even more confused as ever. So you have to bear with me as I give this presentation because I really have no idea what I'm talking about. Despite, going there for 2 months, I feel like I know less leaving than I knew going. And I don't know how to even begin to interpret and digest Fusuma Karakuri. I don't know. I'm trying my best. So maybe we'll have a great discussion, and I don't know. Maybe
I'm going to say a little bit that's a little bit how I felt when I left Japan. I discovered so many things, and it just left me with so much more. I wanted more questions I wanted to ask. More.
I know exactly. So I'll quickly show some pictures, and I'll share my screen and kind of talk about some stuff. So I'm going to do this thing where you're going to see my desktop a lot, and I'm going to maybe stop sharing really quick because I want to make sure I share with the video optimized. But you're going to see my desktop. I'm really scared. Who knows what you're going to see on my desktop? But because I'm like right off of this trip, I feel like, oh, I could just kind of show like where, just kind of like I'm just dumped all my files on my computer. I have a small little PowerPoint and we'll like go through my files together. Almost for the first time, I'll be looking at them. But Claudia mentioned that I went to Japan for about a year in 2016, and I was looking at this type of festival practice, these puppets called karakuri ningyo, which are these mechanical puppets that are operated on top of these floats during a lot of festivals in Japan. Why am I talking about karakuri ningyo? I'll tell you later, but it's important to notice that a lot of these performances, they end with this moment of transformation where you have.
I'm just gonna stop you for a second because you have your control panel is kind of over
Oh,
the
yeah.
puppet.
You can
You
see
want
my
to see the
control panel. There
puppet.
we go. Thank you. No, thanks for
Oh,
doing
great.
that. Thanks. There we go. That's better. I thought you couldn't see it. Thanks for telling me.
It's still visible. Are you able to?
There we go. How about that? It's not blocking anything, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. We'll leave it there. But there's these moments of transformation that not every, but most of these performances are sort of leave you with, which is you might have a priest transform into a cauldron, or you might have a gentleman come out of someone's body and shoot a bow and arrow at a dartboard. Like there's these kind of really amazing sort of transformations that happen and really show off a lot of the mechanical ingenuity that's going on. And they're using ropes and they're using rods, and the puppeteers are inside of these floats operating these puppets, and really kind of using the ingenuity of the mechanics to create this moment of awe and wonder for the audience. And while I was there in 2016, I was going to a Ningyo Jorori performance in this island of Tokushima, and then I came across, like at the end of one of the performances, they started to perform this type of, I guess I would say, a sliding panel theater, which is you have these Fusuma, which are sort of the ubiquitous doors that you see everywhere in Japan that are used, these screens that are used for everything. We almost sort of forget them. And in Fusuma karakuri, they're hand painted and they're collected in these sets. And each set is made up of between 9 and maybe 13 Fusuma panels or Fusumae, and they're hand painted, and they create these murals that move in and out of the space. And they sort of sometimes will do a transformation, like they might flip and they might move up and they might move down, depending on what theater you're watching a Fusuma karakuri performance at. Like every theater has a different way of transforming these panels and a different way of moving between these sets of hand-painted slides. So here's another performance. Wow, look at them go. And what's really interesting is that as you watch the performance, and this is quite fascinating to me, and it's kind of this amazing experience, which is not only are you experiencing the awe of the transformations and moving between the panels, but you're also moving further and further and further into this space. And so what you kind of end up with is you almost like a peep show as a viewer, you find yourself moving into the interior of the theater because the panels are just going further and further and further back, and they're still moving. And they also use perspective, so it feels like you truly are moving through space. So I'm going to show you a little bit more example of what I mean by this here. This is a performance in Inukai Fusuma karakuri. So I'm going to scrub through this a little bit, because here, actually, let's watch it a little bit and then I'll scrub through it so you can kind of get the timing. And in the background there, you can hear the shamisen. And it's a bit of I think this full performance, at least at the Nukai, is about almost 30 minutes. As we move into this interior space and we look at the different sets of paintings. And then we keep moving, and it keeps moving. And then, as you can see, there's a frame there to create a perspective. And then we keep moving, and then there's another frame that kind of comes inside the other frame that creates another perspective. And we just keep going further and further back into the space. And then there's a flip. Actually, let's watch that transformation. It's pretty cool. And so similar to Kawakuri Ningyo, you have these moments of transformation that create this kind of sense of awe that is shared by the audience and this sense of wonder. Wow, look at that. Even I watch this again, I'm excited. Wow. And the puppeteers are all back here in the wings. And there are, in this performance, there's 10 puppeteers operating this this show. And I think I'll show you some backstage that looks like backstage. So let's see. I think I have some backstage pictures. Oh yeah, here's what it looks like in one theater company, Sakura Nozan Butai in Kamiyama. This is backstage. I don't have any of the performers, but you have performers that are helping slide these panels off into the wings, moving all the panels and then lifting them up. And it really takes a lot of collaboration between both sides, because when you make these sets turn or transform, there's puppeteers on one side, puppeteers on the other side, and they have to sort of work together in order to make a really smooth transformation. So it's a lot of hard work. And it's sort of like, I've been thinking a lot about this, but it's sort of, to me, like a type of collective, like proto cinema, where you're creating kind of live animation. Oh, here we go. Here's some nice footage. You're creating the sense of live animation, but you're doing it collaboratively, and you're doing it with 10 people, and you're doing it in a way that's not necessarily the most resourceful, but it creates a very, very unique and one-of-a-kind experience. There's really nothing else. There's really nothing else like it. I guess I could talk a little bit about the history. Actually, I want to show you a map. I think that's important. Map, so we know what region I'm talking about. Because what's interesting about Fusuma is, we'll talk about Hedgehog in the Fog in a little bit, is that it's really specific to one region of Japan. And I mean really, I mean like, it's 100% specific to this one region of Japan, which is here's Shikoku right here, and we're going to zoom in, and then here's Tokushima Prefecture, and pretty much all of the Fusuma Kawakuri theaters operating right now are in Tokushima, except for one. The other one is right here on Awaji Island, right in the tip of Awaji. But most of the ones that are still operating, and there are about 7, are operating in Tokushima. And they're all quite close to each other. And there's a bit of mystery exactly why to me, but we could start that at some period, there were traveling puppet companies, mostly based in Awaji, and these companies had Fusuma Kawakuri performances, and they would travel with them, actually. So originally, Fusuma Kawakuri was transportable, and these, companies would bring their shows through Tokushima, and at some point, there's one area of Tokushima, Naka, which includes the city of Kamiyama. Artists would visit, or maybe not artists, actually, like farmers and craftspeople, and maybe gamblers and puppeteers. They would pass through the area. And as they passed through this area of Kamiyama, Naka, and Tokushima, they started painting a lot of Fusuma panels. And eventually they were just filled, the whole area was just filled with hand-painted Fusuma panels. And they're not necessarily beautiful murals. Some of them are very sort of folk, amateur style painting. But luckily, Kamiyama has stored and collected these paintings, Fusuma panels, hand-painted panels, through this region of Naka. And they've kept them really maintained and together. There's about 2,000 of them. And I'll go through the slideshow. Here's one of the aisles. They have about 2,000 that are stored. And the company, the Fusuma Kawakuri company there, still performs with the Fusuma Kawakuri at their theater every year, which is really, really exciting, and which is really interesting and unique to this Kamiyama company called Sakura Nozan Butai, is that they have asked artists from all around the world to come visit. And when the artists visit, they make original hand-painted Fusuma that they incorporate into their annual performances, which is quite exciting and really cool. So there's sort of these updated contemporary Fusuma panels that are used in the performances. This is just some video and slideshow of me in the archives there in Kamiyama. And maybe I can quickly show you really quick. Let me see, Kamiyama, Andrea does so. oh yeah, so here's like one of the contemporary artists that came to Kamiyama, and she created these really awesome faces that transform their emotions. And these are incorporated in the annual show. It's pretty interesting. Let me go back to this slideshow, perhaps.
Hey, how interesting that is.
Oh yeah, hello, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was just going to say how interesting that is that they're incorporating these contemporary artists and giving contemporary artists an opportunity to think about how this how the images and the action of the screens function to create something that works with it, but of their own style. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. And I think that's what's really fascinating to me about this practice is that I forgot to mention it's actually quite young for a Japanese practice. So it's like, for example, Kamiyama, they started in 1906, end of the Meiji era. So it's quite young. So only about 120 years old. But it's all, and to me also, it feels very resonant to the way that we think about animation and the way that we think about these ideas of expanded cinema and the ways that we think about puppetry sort of expanding into new notions of what the puppet is and how we use puppetry and sort of the similarities between puppets and animation and proto cinema. That to me, Fusuma Karakuri begins to sort of really illustrate a lot of these interesting questions and really brings these questions to the forefront, especially when we look at a lot of contemporary ideas of what animation is, and sort of looking at how, we look at the phenomena of transformation and how when we look at transformation through puppetry and animation, that it often, the transformation uses a sense of awe that's sort of in between the two moments, that we're aware of the in-between space between the two moments. And we all kind of, as an audience, sort of celebrate that moment because it does create this really tactile sense of wonder that is totally on display in Fusuma Karakuri, which makes me just totally fascinated by this practice. And the use of dimensionality really reminds me a bit of like the use of a multiplane in a lot of contemporary animation work. I know we don't have too much time. I kind of want to, and I really want to talk to the other panelists about their presentation. So I am going to wrap up a little bit here. But yeah, thanks for listening. I'm really excited to talk more about this and to talk to the other panelists. And thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be back at the Ballard. I used to have Emily's job. I think I used to when I was at UConn. So it's also nice to be here presenting at a forum. It's cool.
Great. Thank you so much. That's so interesting. I saw that, I was saying before that I saw that performance at Inukai last year when I was there, and it was the COVID time. And so they weren't allowed to have a live audience, although there were some local people who had come by, but mostly was performed and filmed for television, and not a big crowd like you saw there. But I think one of the things that so surprised me, even having known a little bit about it from like Basil Twist's production, Dogu Gaeshi, that was kind of based on the Awaji, inspired by the Awaji version, was, as you say, like a half hour. It was a whole half hour, and it just kept getting more exciting and more interesting. And I wouldn't have thought that you keep thinking like, what else could they possibly do? How much else is there to do with this, what's basically a very simple idea? And I was really surprised at how continually astonishing and immersive and I don't know exactly how to express it, but just moving it was.
Yeah, I think astonishment is a really great word. It's like using astonishment as like a way of moving as an experience forward.
Well, let's bring back our other guests, and maybe we'll just have a little bit of discussion here before we wrap up for our live Q&A. Zach, you said you had some questions for Mari or Yoko.
I was like really struck when Yoko was talking about when they were talking about the extinction of puppetry in 1909, and this like that resonating now, like that conversation happening was really I couldn't believe it. I was really shocked by that research.
And also they thought the European puppetry was going extinct too. So.
Really interesting. Why was that?
Yeah, because they checked only 19th century literature, And it says, of course, 19th century was not in a slump, was in a slump in European puppetry, especially German puppetry was in a slump. So they thought, okay, they're going to just disappear. So they didn't know, they were in the beginning of 20th century, they were not aware of this artistic tendency, the modernist
It's also because of realism, the sort of big imposition of realism in the theater. And also importing that from the West into Japan, this idea of realism, and maybe puppets aren't realists, they're not like psychological realism, they're the opposite. So
right. And the funny thing is actually like for example, this British puppetry which came to Japan had a different idea of realism. Actually, they stick to realism. Like the best praise for them was that it looked like a real human, because these Victorian marionettes were puppeteer, but at the same time showman of the wax figure. Yeah, right. So so in Japan, some review of this dark theater said that, oh, it really looked like real human. So maybe they were happy to hear this notion, but yeah, it's strange. But for us, of course, this realism, we had also wax figures, but they were just like for showmanship. They were the puppeteer and wax people were totally divided. So this kind of realism was not the aim of puppeteers at the time.
And I'm really curious. So Mario, you're talking about Yukiza being from 1635, but Yoko, it sort of sounded like people were in Japan, that company, this first marionette company was something new. I mean, I'm just kind of wondering how the traditional marionettes were considered in relationship to that, or what that relationship is between those two.
I think, well, the Japanese one comes from the Edo culture, right? Through the Edo culture. Whereas what theater artists were doing, they were going to Europe and really researching all kinds of theater there. And they were bringing that in and importing. So I think that side is the root of what is called the 1923, using foreign material and foreign, it was all imported.
Yeah,
and that would be the modernization of puppetry as well as theater.
But they didn't, was there a sense of the relationship of, since they're both marionettes, that there's some kind of relationship?
Oh, they were really, so what happened was that marionettes became high art, it was experimental high art, because it's very delicate, right? When you're handling strings, right? It's not like regular hand puppets. So the Yukiza was very involved in that, right? But they spent so much money, right? Either going or importing material, and they hadn't cultivated an audience. So I think someone went bankrupt in the process. I don't remember the details, and that financially they were absolutely screwed. they couldn't get anywhere, so they had to stop. Right? And Yukiza had their own style to fall back on. But yeah, Yukiza was very involved in that that early avant-garde marionette, right, movement.
And
that's as much as I remember right now offhand. So Yoko, you probably have more to add about Yukiza.
No, yeah. Well, I think like when I read these articles written in the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, the Yukiza had some really, how do you say, tricky position, so to say, because they were in the middle of like vulgar art, vulgar culture and theater. So they, for example, they staged not the high, like not chikamatsu, but they did, but they also staged some novels, which was how do you say, which showed on a newspaper, for example. So dealt with more like everyday love stories and so on. So the theme was not so yeah, the chikamatsu was also a love story. they had they had different topics, and so and also they had Bunraku and Yukiza had different names. Yukiza was called Ayatsuri, and Bunraku was called Puppet Theater, Ningyō Shibai. So actually, they were not regarded as one genre, I think, as I see.
I think the Edo marionettes were practically decimated by the popularity of Bunraku, right? And it was Yukiza that survived because they kabuki-ized themselves. So that's why they're speaking their own lines. The puppeteers are speaking. They don't have a chanter and a shamisen, so that's how they survived. They tried to go with the times. So if kabuki was popular or if bunraku was popular, they would try to, they were always very innovative.
I think that's a continued theme, right, with Yukiza. When we went and spoke with them last year, they were talking about that moment when they started doing, at least in the 20th century, started doing more contemporary productions, because also they were strapped for money and they were worried about their audiences and needing to survive, and started bringing in, along with the traditional repertoire, more contemporary ideas. And then I think even this production of Metamorphosis really also shows this continued interest in experimentation and in keeping with the times, trying to figure out new ways of doing things.
I think it was Mago Saboro IX who was the real innovator and revolutionized Yukiza's traditional art. So it's strange how I would have thought that they would be willing to change their puppet structure, but that might affect their funding from Tokyo and Japan, from the Arts Council and places like that if they did that. So they're doing everything but touching the puppet structure.
Yeah, and still using the traditional manipulation, even with a puppet like the big bug puppet. I was wondering, Zach, if you got to, when you were in Japan, if you got to try moving all of those Fusuma, did people let you, was there an opportunity for that to sort of?
Yeah, in 2016 or 2017, I spent a lot of time with Sakura no Zonbutai in Kamiyama. And so I got to work with them a bit when they were preparing for their spring festival. This year was really challenging because of the pandemic. And challenging because not only were audiences smaller, rehearsals were less frequent, and most companies were not performing this year. And actually it even means more, I think, in Japan when you say the pandemic, because also a lot of the people who are participating and keeping these companies going are older, and so not only is the pandemic more a serious issue, but because of the pandemic, they have less, there's just more complications in it with health concerns, and then they're in isolation more. And so you also have people getting older and hurting themselves, even just falling down and not being able to use their bodies the same way. So there's just a lot of complications.
I was gonna say that's interesting because when I was there last year, it sounded from what you were, even just what you showed us, that there were more events going on than last year and more audience members and
Yes, but it was still even small, and it was still I don't even know if the company in Kamiyama, which I think really is one of the second most popular, they don't even know if they're gonna perform this year. So not only was it already kind of like a disappearing art form, but now I feel like it's really on the cusp of extinction.
Do they have special theater or houses? How deep does it get? I mean, I saw Basil Twist's Dogugaishi. Yeah. But that was they specially made that space for them. But do they have regular theaters, and what would they do with those? Can they turn them into museums, or can they do something else?
No, so well, in Tokushima, they looked, and there's hundreds and hundreds of puppet theaters, right, in Tokushima that are abandoned or not in use, and about 100 of them have the Fusuma karakuri devices inside of them. And then and then I know Inukai, that theater is considered an artifact. It's really a big deal because not only does it have the depth and the technical, the pulley system for the Fusuma, but it also has this green room underneath. So it's become this like cultural artifact, and it's actually been able to kind of keep going because of the theater itself is so unique that it's received like certain support and funding because it's such a unique site. And then Kamiyama's is original, and I think most of them actually have been rebuilt to hold the panels. Awaji, they rebuilt theirs, although theirs is not quite, to them, it's a little different. Sorry, it's not exactly, they have panels from a theater that existed before, so it's not exactly Awaji Ningyoza's Fusuma, but they built one that's quite modern. And this year, Inukai performed at the National in Osaka, the National Bunraku Theater, in 2019, excuse me. In 2019, they performed there, so they actually had to build the theater inside of on the stage of the National in Osaka, and they brought the panels there and performed it there. But it was very, very expensive.
I had never seen the ones that turned that way.
Yeah, that one's really rare. I haven't either. That's Ushiroyama in Tokushima, and they canceled this year, but it's totally nuts. Yeah, all of them moved together.
Yoko, we're going to close up in a little bit, but I wanted to ask Yoko what the next research part of this this investigation is that you're looking at.
Oh, I'm now interested in what you said before, like the notion of realism. It's a big topic, but the realism of puppetry for Japanese puppetry, like what, yeah, the idea in the course of the change from the end of 19th century to beginning of 20th century.
And Mari, what is the new production that Yukiza, are they working on something new this year?
They're going to have Hanagumi Shibai. That's the new kabuki, neo kabuki, right? And they're all kind of cross-dressed guys. Right? What's his name? I've forgotten his name. Anyway, the head leader is very good. He's an onnagata. He's fabulous. I mean, he's aging now, but he still has something different from the others, you know. But his men, the other actors they're just ojisan. So in female attire, they look terrible. They all look like okama, and they import young boys, like beautiful young boys, okay, to play in their, to add color to their shows, right? So it's that group itself has kind of gone down, but Kano-san is a really good director, and he's worked with Yukiza a couple of times before. And Yukiza says, you know, they'll work 3 times with an outsider. With Wishin Chon, this is the 4th time they're working with him, so they really like him. And they've gone back to Hanagumi again, but they don't have the Hanagumi actors in their shows, right? They may have just one. I don't know if it'll be a beautiful boy or not. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name.
Read Mari's book, you'll find out all the different kinds of, there's a lot of work about, Yukiza here and the different kind of collaborations they've done. I'm going to close up for now because we're going to have an opportunity to come back and have a live Q&A with people who've been watching. And I really want to thank all of our guests today and look forward to speaking to you again for our live Q&A. Thank you so much. I'm going to.
Thank you too.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to invite all of our panelists to come back in. It was nice to get to hear that conversation we had over, actually, and get all the details and get to see everybody again. So we have some questions. There's been a little, I was told, Emily's telling me that although we've been having a little bit of conversation here on the webinar, folks who are watching on Facebook or seeing on Facebook actually don't get to see the chat that we're looking at. So there are some questions we've been answering, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about them. And there's, I think, a new question here. So let's see, Andrew Periali was asking, I think this is interesting. He said in the past 20 years or so, so many Western puppet theaters describe their work, or their work has been described as quote unquote bunraku style. Do Japanese theaters take this as a compliment or as something without a lot of significance? And Yoko had something to say about that, and maybe you want to kind of recap that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I wrote down also in the chat place, but this work, I didn't know this meeting of international meeting myself, and I was super very much surprised when I first came to know this meaning. So it's used to describe like three people manipulation, right? Of some rather big size of one puppet. Yeah, but of course, bunraku has three elements. The first is chanting, second is shamisen, third is puppetry, and traditionally, conventionally, and also now, the chanter or the singing is the first position, like is the leader. So the puppetry is like third position, like a third. It's not of third importance, but always the chanting is the thing. So yeah, so like this usage of bunraku is simply not correct. But when I tell about it to some person in bunraku, for example, a producer of bunraku or some puppeteer of bunraku, like everybody is just happy to know that our company name bunraku is used as like some general noun is internationally. So it's like nice to hear. But of course, there are many joruri groups, other ningyo joruri groups throughout Japan, and they say just
Explain people, ningyo joruri means the puppet ningyo with the joruri, which is a style of chanting, and it's a sort of musical and chanting style. And so it's again emphasizing, as you say, the music and the chanting, and not exclusively the puppet. It's like the puppets with this, and that's more the common term. Zach, you had some response to that as well. I'm curious to.
Oh yeah, I'm really glad that Yoko was talking about this. It's a really interesting topic. I remember when I first saw. Also, one thing maybe to note too is that like the Western idea, when a lot of Westerners are using bunraku, they often imagine three puppeteers controlling a puppet, and the puppet's movements are rather realistic, or they're sort of what they perceive as realism movement, or realistic movement, or something that's a bit identifiable as human emotion. While a bunraku performance, the manipulation is not necessarily at all aiming for realism. It's sort of aiming for a type of tradition in the movement, and a type of gesture that is really part of that company. And then, of course, I'm always, I was just going to say maybe full articulation of a puppet is maybe a better way of describing it. That what bunraku offers is this ability to really, manipulate all the parts of the puppet in a very detailed way. Yeah. I also am I was really surprised when I came to Japan the first time, because also a lot of ningyo joruri performances are so community based. And my idea of bunraku when I was in the West, like growing up and learning about puppets, was it was very it was sort of like opera, and it had this very sort of noble, like highly professional connotation. And then I came to really learn that kind of the heart and the core of puppetry in Japan is actually quite rural and community based and free, and involves farmers who are performing the puppets, and it's a totally different approach than I always imagined.
Yeah, I mean, the bunraku is really, it's the national theater, so that's really in a class by itself. It's got its own thing, and then there's all of this other kind of puppetry that's being done. And some in that, what Elen was asking about, the real term we would use for it would be sanninzukai, or three-person manipulation technique. So that technique of using three people on the puppet is called that. And I mean, one of the things that I found so interesting about looking at traditional puppetry in Japan is that there really are this huge variety of ways that different companies and troops that have different histories have tried to figure out how to manipulate, especially those very large figures that became sanninzukai figures, like when you don't have enough people, like how to do it with two people or how to do it with one. And so there's a lot of different kind of things about like ways of creating how can I reach all these limbs at once.
Right.
How about the term I was thinking was, when I saw some of the international bunrak style, was it wasn't necessarily 3, right? There seemed to be no emphasis on the number, but it had to be multiple. So more like multiple manipulation, like Amal and those giant, figures we've been seeing recently.
Yeah.
I don't know
Amal
how many people are they? 10 people, 15 people involved there?
Well, Amal
maybe
is
that's
free, but Royale Deluxe, has a whole company of performers, and so you're right. I think that's it's very loosely. It's a term that's really loosely applied. I think I would say something like it's a way for certainly puppeteers in the U.S. to just be able to talk about a different kind of manipulation and what they want to accomplish. Nancy Stubb has an interesting question here. I think this is maybe for Yoko. Was there no influence by Chinese marionettes? Maybe this is for everybody. That's an interesting question. There's a lot of marionette tradition in China, and did that come into Japan? I don't know if that influenced Yukiza in the early, in the Edo period, maybe. I'm not sure where the first.
I'm sorry, I drew a blank on this.
Nancy, you've stumped the panel. I don't know that we, but
Chinese marionettes, like marionettes in China, is just a very small part of the puppetry in China. The biggest part is shadow puppet. The shadow puppet is the biggest, and the second is the hand puppets. Also, you can see it in Taiwan and some southern part of China. And marionette is actually one of the smallest part of Chinese puppetry. And also
I was just gonna say that there's no traditional shadow puppet form in Japan, which I always find fascinating.
That's true. That's because in China it was allowed to use or eat animal meat, but in Japan for a long time it was prohibited to kill animal and eat animals. So we cannot use the skin of the animals. That's why we didn't have sculpture as in China. That was a difference.
We had a question from Matthew Cohen for Yoko, and again, you answered a little bit, but you could explain more. Could you explain to us the influence of bunraku on this 1923 modern puppet production? It's hard to see any influence in the photo you showed.
Right, and I don't see any. You're right. I don't see also any influence on the script, of course, because they use this Metterlang script, and also the style is totally Western. But I just said so in the presentation because they wrote in a biographical book that they, before creating the show, they did a research on bunraku and marionettes to create this performance. And I think as being a Japanese, you cannot skip bunraku, when you make any production related to puppetry. So I just thought, and also if you are looking at contemporary puppetry, I recognize that every Japanese company is super precise in manipulation in comparison to other countries. They are more focused on the manipulation than the general idea or how they present the idea. But they always focused on the manipulation. That's what I'm always they really pay special attention to the correct manipulation. And this is, I think this, unconsciously we are influenced by bunraku. And I think in creation of this 1923 show, I think they're also under this influence. So they had to do very precise manipulation. And also also seen in the review, they did not do it in folk puppetry way, but very precise way. Even if they did not see European marionettes, they did it in a very precise way. So the manipulation, how it should look like, must be like bunraku. This should be the image of the manipulation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's they were finding out some things about, I don't know, how to I don't know how you see like how the human body, I mean, even though there's very stylized to this Edo style performance body, you know, how hands and feet should work together, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of
That's true.
details.
That's true.
If you had no other puppetry resources, you know, to consult.
Right. As
you know.
Mari sensei, boy.
Well, I think they were, for them, I mean, for the Japanese side, the experiment was doing realism, you know, in the way the Europeans were doing realism. That was the real experiment. And sure, you know, if you want to do something properly, you go into the history of your own side to see what there is, you know, but that may not be reflected in the production, because the actual purpose is to do something as delicately as you're used to doing it, but in a different, but learning a different style, and wowing the audience that way. Because realism had a tremendous influence on like general theater, right? It was the new rational, serious way of discussing the world. You know, it wasn't about melodrama or, you know, just love stories and a spectacle. It was something much closer to our actual lives and how we should live in a modern world. So I think that was the experimental side. So it's kind of, for you people, it's all old hat. You know this, you've seen it, you've done it already.
I was wondering though,
because with like Shingeki, Shingeki was being introduced, the new drama was being introduced at that time, and with human actors, and even now the acting is not that good. Right? I go to see a so-so European realistic performance. Wow, this is fantastic for me, because I'm not used to that level of naturalism or realism. I think sometimes if I go to Angura, I think, what am I doing watching this? You know, but it's for a different reason, right? It's for a different kind of expressivity. Right? And realism is actually, for me, boring, but it's still, when you see it at that level, you know, it strikes me as amazing. So I think that's how the Japanese felt, and that's what they wanted to copy or imitate or, you know, aspire to.
Good point. That's interesting, since I guess American, or I don't know, I don't want to speak for American puppetry, but the idea of bunraku, as Zach was saying, is that it's so realistic, you know, a misunderstanding. Let's see. Nancy is clarifying. She says, in my experience, bunraku style refers to visible puppeteers generally in black, and there can be even only one puppeteer, as Bruce Schwartz. Bunraku inspired Western puppeteers to explore visible puppeteers as a new dimension. Oh, thank you. That's a good clarification. Sumar-san had a question that I think actually kind of opens up onto a few other questions. I think we're getting to the end of our time, and Emily will let me know. But he said, when I was in Japan in 1970, he was at the Gamelan Music at the Expo 70. I saw Kabuki in Osaka. The theater was a full house. I also saw bunraku in a small theater, almost full house. What's the state of traditional Japanese puppet theater today? And I was saying that, you know, the National Theater of the Osaka, the bunraku, they perform a full program and every year, and also travel to Tokyo. And when I was there, you know, even under the COVID circumstances, they actually could fill the house more or less. You know, there were people going, but they're, you know, nationally supported. And I think a big thing was last year, one of the head puppeteers was being interviewed and said something about that they might start accepting women into the training program, because one of their problems is having enough people to train to be bunraku performers. But I think as Zach was showing, you know, for all the other kinds of puppetry that's in Japan, traditional puppetry, there's a variety of situations. And a lot of the people who do it are elderly. Some of them are rural forms, and people have been moving out of the rural populations have been really decreasing. So this has been, you know, been a big issue. And I don't know if people have other thoughts. I'm just seeing that we're gonna wrap up in a second. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else anyone wants to mention about your views on where traditional puppetry stands in Japan today. And Andrew Periali is adding to Nancy Staub's description that direct manipulation of a figure rather than through strings or rods seems to be also part of the sense of what bunraku is. So I was wondering if anybody had any further thoughts on sort of the situation of traditional puppetry as it's in Japan, particular companies. Yukiza seems to be doing very well. And it's probably because they're also doing contemporary as well as traditional forms, maybe.
Well, the funding situation it's not fantastic, but it's adequate, so that if your puppet group is doing well, I mean, if they're getting audiences and filling the box office, then they can continue their lives in that way. Also, puppetry is still part of the public education up to 3rd grade, right? And let's hope that computer programming doesn't take it over, right? So far it hasn't, right? Yeah. When puppetry ends, computer programming begins right now in Japanese elementary school. So it's safe now, but if puppetry is kind of excised from the education system, then you have a different kind of, I think that's going to be a real problem.
And I was interested, having been in Japan when in the 80s, thing I've really noticed as a change is, puppeteers from all these traditional companies going into schools, doing workshops, letting people try out puppets. I mean, I wasn't doing, really in schools in that time when I was there early on, but it seemed like a very rarefied, difficult art to connect with. And I feel that there's really a attempt to, open up to people, getting more people in and involved. I know we need to finish up. I'm going to finish up with this one question for Zach. I'm sorry, Nancy, but we're going to, from Nathan K. Lee, he says, I'm interested in the cueing and communication of the puppeteers to slide the panels at the same time. Is it verbal? In bunraku, there are physical cues of the puppeteer contact to move together. I think it's the you hear the key.
The hyoshigi. Am I wrong on the term? It's the wooden.
Hyoshigi. That's right. Right.
Which so there is that. I think that definitely is part of the cueing. It's like a wooden instrument. It's a wooden block instrument that's used. And you can hear it during the performance. It's like a pretty loud kind of wooden clicking. And I think they also are communicating verbally a little bit and looking. You can see each other when you're in the back of the theater. You can lean over and also appear. But I think it's that hyoshigi block.
There is also music, right?
And
there is music. The shamisen.
Nancy Stubbs says, what about the takedas? And I'm not sure.
Takeda ningyoza?
I guess so. I don't actually know.
Takeda ningyoza is close to yukiza, right? It's an offshoot. Or at least the one I'm thinking of. There might be another. Takeda is a very common name. Yeah? And I think they're dormant right now. I think they're not doing very much, as far as I can tell. But it is part of the general yukiza kind of, way of manipulation.
Okay.
I think it was Mago Saboro the Ninth's disciple that started takedas. I may be wrong. I get my details wrong sometimes. So.
Well, I think on that note, we're going to close up here. I really want to thank, first of all, everybody at the Ballard, especially Emily, Emily Wicks, who's helped us pull this all together. I want to thank my guests, our guests, Zach and Mari and Yoko, and everybody who tuned in and asked wonderful questions. And thank you all. This was a really wonderful conversation and interesting for me, and I'm glad I got to see everybody here. Okay, thanks so much.